The Grand Prix Motorcycle Racing World Championship has visited dozens of tracks in its long history. Nowadays, every single track on the calendar is a purpose-built Grand Prix racetrack. But this wasn't always the case. In fact, in the early days of the championship, the majority of tracks were road and street circuits. Now you may have noticed that the set looks a little different today. And that's because, yeah, I have a green screen, baby. Oh boy, I got a green screen. Look at this. Now I'm in France. Now I'm in Monaco. Now I'm in Malaysia. That's awesome. I figured, what better way to test out my brand new green screen than by taking a trip around the world and looking at all of MotoGP's defunct street circuits. Because I want to see which ones would make for the best racing today. Now don't get me wrong, these circuits were taken off the calendar for a reason, and I'm very glad that riders are no longer required to risk life and limb by racing on dangerous and unsafe street circuits. But what if they were magically safe? What if tomorrow someone makes a magical new suit that just utterly eliminates injuries from crashes? What then? Should any of these circuits come back? Should all of these circuits come back? Let's take a look at every street circuit the Grand Prix Motorcycle Racing World Championship ever used and see which ones would be the best on today's calendar. Hey everyone, Editor B here. Since this video was recorded, there have been some people online advocating for the actual return of street circuits to the MotoGP calendar. I would like to stress that I think that this is a terrible idea and that is not the point of this video. No hate to the people who are suggesting this, but I'm not sure they understand just how dangerous street circuits would be for modern Grand Prix motorcycles. This is a pure hypothetical, and the reason it was framed in that way is so that I would have a better frame of reference as someone who doesn't really have the ability to watch motorcycle racing on these circuits in the era in which they were used, that being the 50s and 60s, when video was very scarce. If riders want to race on street circuits, that's perfectly fine, and there are plenty of events for that, some that I watch regularly. However, riders who want to compete in MotoGP should not be required to do something so dangerous. One last thing before we get started, I'm putting together a Q&A video for 5,000 subscribers. If you have a question you would like answered, reply to the pinned comment in the comment section below. Alright then, we're going to go in chronological order here, and we're starting with the Snaefell mountain course, perhaps better known as the Isle of Man TT course. And yeah, we're starting with a banger. Perhaps the single most iconic motorcycle racing circuit of all time. The Snaefell Mountain Course was the home of the very first ever motorcycle Grand Prix in 1949, but this course had been used previously for motorcycle racing all the way back in 1911. It was used in every single Grand Prix motorcycle season from 1949 to 1976, and holds the record for being the single longest circuit ever used in the championship, coming in at a whopping 37.7 miles, or just over 60 kilometers. As we'll see later, most long street circuits fall victim to a few problems, but this one manages to avoid most of those. First, it has a wide variety of corner profiles. From tight hairpins to wide open kinks, you can find pretty much every kind of corner imaginable on this course somewhere. There's plenty of overtaking opportunities as well, and the scenery is quite varied. Cutting through the countryside, up the mountain itself, and through multiple towns and villages, it provides a show for the eyes. Now, of course, this venue is still used in the modern day, so we have a wonderful idea of exactly how TV coverage of an event like this would work. While I admit that helicopter shots may be a bit too prevalent, with a long course like this, there's no real way around that. Finally, it's just a gorgeous venue. Since I'm ranking these tracks based on how much I would want to see them on today's calendar, that's important to me. Phillip Island is an amazing track. Nobody would want to go to it if it was located in Siberia. There's nothing I can say about this track that hasn't already been said. It's amazing, and it has the most history of any of the tracks on this list by far. This is the benchmark, it sets the bar, and it goes in S tier. But wait, there's more. Do you want two tracks for the price of one? Well, I have good news for you. From 1954 to 1959, this layout, called the Clypse Course, was used for the 125 and 250cc classes. This is a shorter course, also on the Isle of Man, with some overlapping sections on the A18 and A5 roads. Now, I've never actually seen a modern race on this course, but I've played it in games, and it seems pretty good to me. I mean, it looks like a shorter version of the Isle of Man course, and that's a pretty big compliment. They managed to find a shorter layout on the Isle that still maintains a lot of what makes the larger course great. It still has great corner variety, elevation changes, and even preserves some iconic features like Governor's Bridge and Cronknamona. In addition, getting solid TV coverage would probably be even easier considering this course is about a third of the length of the main one. Overall, I'd put this in A tier. It doesn't have the same historical connotations as the full course, and it really doesn't do anything that the full course doesn't do better. But I would still prefer this over almost anything else. The next race on the calendar is the Dutch TT, and it was hosted at the TT Circuit van Drethe. This was a 16.5 kilometer course located on public roads outside of the city of Assen, where the modern circuit lies today. They share the same start-finish straight and the same first corner, but after that, the similarities end. This track is slightly more difficult to judge, as many of the roads that it was originally on simply no longer exist. Therefore, judging the specific corner profiles is a little bit tough, but overall it seems kind of fine. This is sort of the first appearance of one of the biggest problems that a lot of these courses have: excessive straights. Now, a lot of public roads are straight because, well, that's the easiest way to make a public road. You're not just going to throw in random curves, so there's many cases of courses with just too many straightaways. But I will say that this track does a better job than some of mitigating this. There are some sections that break this up and look rather interesting. I like this section that goes through the hamlet of Logholland quite a bit. I think it's the most interesting part of the course by quite a fair margin. I mean, there's some good corner variety here, and it looks like there would be a few decent overtaking opportunities, but it's still sort of boring and a little too long to justify what it does. I'm going to go with border of C tier and D tier, but given its history, I think C tier feels more appropriate. Oh, Spa is next. I love Spa. In fact, it's one of the tracks I want the bikes to go back. What the fuck is that? Spa-Francorchamps held the Belgian Grand Prix from 1949 straight through to 1990, only missing out on 2 years in 1980 and 1987. But until 1979, the circuit was a 14.1 kilometer long road circuit that went through the countryside. Listen, I think the Grand Prix part of this circuit is great. La Source, Le Rouge, and then this sweeping corner that goes uphill and is sort of off camber at the peak. But after that, things go downhill. Quite literally, as the course takes you downhill and then through the countryside. As you come downhill, the track basically just becomes straights and wide sweeping corners. There are a couple of slight variations, but not enough to really sway me in any real way. I would say things only really start getting interesting again once you start heading uphill towards the modern circuit, but even then, most of the intrigue just comes from elevation change. This one really isn't doing it for me, but I do really want to see modern bikes take on Eau Rouge. C tier. Oh, the Ulster Grand Prix is next? That's another good track. Dundrod's a pretty good circuit. Wait, what? They didn't use that until 1953? What did they use? Oh, well, that doesn't look too... Oh, what the hell? Yes, prior to the Ulster Grand Prix that we know today, a 20-kilometer long circuit called the Clady Circuit was used instead. And it features this monstrosity. This is what is known as the 7-mile straight. I'll give you one guess why it's called that. When the old bikes of the 1950s were racing here, this probably worked fine. But nowadays... I mean, I guess we would find out just how true Jack Miller's 400 km/h claims really are. To put that into perspective, the current max race speed ever achieved by a MotoGP bike is 227.5 miles an hour. Assuming a rider averaged that speed across this straight, it would still take them over 1 minute and 50 seconds to get from one end to another. This would be a fun novelty for like 2 laps. I mean, we might get riders swapping places 2 or 3 times using the slipstream down a single straight. But miss your braking marker and, well, one of these families ends up with a brand new living room decoration. This course's entire problem is just how damn big it is. Take this section for example. This looks like a smooth back and forth flowing section, until you realize the distance between these corners is 900 meters, enough to make it one of the longest straights on the calendar right now. Knowing where to place a street circuit is very important. You need to pick a good place that has some flowing roads and regular corners. You can't just slap it down anywhere. This is something that the Ulster Grand Prix will learn, but it hasn't yet. F tier, send this to hell. You know, this really isn't going that bad so far. Sure, the 7-mile straight is an affront to humanity, but at least we don't have Avis yet. You know, where you just go up one road and then turn around and come back down the same road. It's right behind me, isn't it? Oh, goddamn. This is the Circuit des Nations, used for 1 year in 1950 to host the Swiss Grand Prix. I wonder why they never came back. Alright, let's start with the positives. First of all, this race is located in the heart of Geneva, Switzerland. Beautiful location. These corners are fine. I mean, there's nothing interesting about them, but you know, this road looks just wide enough to where if you pick just the right line, you might be able to link them together in a sort of like double apex type thing. This kinked corner here looks pretty fun, I guess, but I cannot get over this. The funny thing is, this track didn't used to look like this. It used to look like this, and then someone, in a moment of genius, thought, hey, what if we slapped a 2-kilometer long spaghetti noodle onto the end of it? Yes, you do literally ride up one side of a road, turn around, and ride back down the other side of the same road. This is joining Clady Circuit in F tier. Home of the Barcelona 24 Hours race and 16 times host of the Spanish Grand Prix, we have the Montjuïc Circuit. And hold on, wait a minute, this is amazing? First, this track is located in the middle of Barcelona, making it the highest profile location that we've seen so far. Second, the streets are actually fairly wide in a lot of parts of this course, which is something that a lot of the countryside tracks actually struggle with quite a bit. And thankfully, it is actually a reasonable length for a racetrack. If anything, it's actually a little short, coming in at just 3.7 kilometers. We start with this stadium section, which is actually the venue for the 1992 Summer Olympics, going uphill before diving downhill into a very sharp turn 1. And this turn 2, 3, and 4 complex takes you all downhill, which I think could make for some interesting battles and amazing lap 1 moments. After that, this slight chicane takes you uphill to turn 5, which leads you into this spectator section on the streets before and after turn 6. Turns 7, 8, and 9 are these sweeping uphill S-turns that are actually close enough together to flow nicely, something that we have been sorely lacking on a lot of these tracks so far. Is this what actual track design looks like? All of these things do make a good track. Unfortunately, this is also known as one of the most dangerous street circuits ever. However, in this scenario where danger doesn't matter, I would love to see this on the calendar. This track looks awesome, it's in a beautiful venue, and I think it could be amazing. For me personally, this is S tier. I would love to see this again. Alright, well, you know, we had a couple of bad ones, but that one was pretty good. Maybe we're starting a new trend. That's just how this is going to be, huh? The Circuit Les Planques, perhaps better known as Albi, was the first of many street circuits used by the French Grand Prix. Do I really need to talk about this? This is another course only used for 1 year. Again, I wonder why they never came back. This racetrack, which I'm getting reports was designed by Pythagoras himself, features 4 real corners. The one positive thing I can say is that this top straight up here actually does feature some corner variety and would probably be interesting to watch. I also love that this is in a city center. While it does make it more dangerous, since we don't care, to me it makes it more beautiful. However, that's where the compliments end. The closer you look at this track, the worse it gets. First of all, it is abhorrently long to justify the lack of corners, and some of these roads are not paved to this day. Today, some of these roads are cobblestone. Could you imagine trying to ride a GP24 on these? I mean, that's actually so absurd, it's kind of making me want to put this higher, but in reality, I know that this has to be F tier. This sucks. It's 1952. And the FIM has decided that Germany has finally had enough time in the timeout corner, and they're ready to be on the Grand Prix calendar. So with their very first effort, they produced the Solitudering. The Solitudering will be used 6 times over the next 13 years, and it's alright. These first 3 or 4 corners, depending on how you want to count them, look like they flow together pretty nice, and I really like this uphill chicane thing. I also really like these downhill switchbacks at the end of the long straight here. This looks awesome, and I'm sure that with the building in the background, it's like beautiful scenery. There would be some amazing shots. This would be immediately an iconic corner. Other than that, this suffers from a lot of the same problems that other ones do. Even if a lot of these straights are technically corners with elevation change, they're far too wide to really be taken as traditional corners, and the elevation change isn't steep enough to provide a lot of entertainment. I do have good news though. If you're a fan of the S-turns at Coda, they're now 3 kilometers long. So like, that's a thing. I mean, at the very least, it's interesting. This track has its moments, it's in a beautiful location, but for the most part, it's just fairly boring. I would say C tier. Imagine a circuit so dangerous that even in 1953, teams refused to race on it. I give you the Schottenring, a street circuit located, of course, in and around Schotten, Germany. The track was called too narrow for modern motorcycles back in the 1950s, and many of the teams in the 500s and 350s refused to race on it. Now those races still went ahead, but they weren't counted, and the 125s and 250s were the only classes to have an official race on this track. You start by going through Schotten itself, and these first few corners actually have an interesting profile and look like they flow together pretty nice. After that you head up the ridgeline on the mountain, and this is probably the least interesting part of the track to me. After that you get probably the most distinctive feature of the course, these massive wide sweeping left-handers connected by this kinked right that has some elevation change I can only pray is a glitch on Google Earth. You get this super steep downhill section with these amazing switchbacks. This would be just a pure spectacle to watch. The course takes you back downhill on a not quite straightaway with some actual corner variety through another village and then back into Schotten. While there are a lot of sections with straights and this course is quite long, in reality they're not quite straights. Since the roads are built into a mountain and a valley, there's a lot of naturally following the lay of the land, which makes for some slight corners that actually force you to do more than just hold open the throttle. Couple that with some interesting sections, particularly through Schotten, down the hill at the top, and these wide sweeping lefts I mentioned earlier, and I really like this one. I would put it high B tier, low A tier. Let's be generous, low A tier. This is our second circuit used for the French Grand Prix, this time in Orival, France. This layout was used in 1953, and I actually don't hate this. Sure, it's not the best thing we've seen by a wide margin, but it is actually a reasonable length, coming in at just over 5 kilometers, and features what looks like some really solid corners. Turns 1 and 2 are fast downhill corners, and this turn 3 and 4 complex looks pretty interesting. Turn 7, called the Samson Curve, is a nice interesting uphill corner that flows nicely into turns 8 and 9. Turns 10 and 11 look like prime overtaking opportunities onto the start and end of this long straight, which, while this is a long straight, it is not excessively long, at just over 1.3 kilometers. Overall, I like this quite a bit. It's not perfect by any means, but it's got a nice straight, it's got some solid elevation changes, and some good corners here. Low B tier, high C tier, low B tier. We're being generous today. Now this track was actually used again in 1965, and between the two races, someone decided that it didn't look enough like a sperm cell. Why? Oh yeah, let's just get rid of 2 of our best corners, add way too many straights, and make it way too long for no reason. That sounds like a great way to design a track. Thank you to whoever did this. D tier. In 1953, someone finally realized that the Clady Circuit was an insult to both mankind and God himself, and they decided to create a new track for the Ulster Grand Prix to run on. And thus, the Dundrod Circuit was born, which has been the iconic venue of the Ulster Grand Prix from 1953 all the way until today. Which is why I think I'm going to upset some people when I say that I'm not the biggest fan of this track. That doesn't mean I don't like it, but I don't think it's anything special either. Don't get me wrong, the lack of incredibly long straights is a blessing. These are the right roads to build a street circuit on. They do have a lot of corners. With that being said, there's very little corner variety, and not that many prime overtaking spots. Sure, these provide for challenging racing, but they do sort of blend together, and there isn't a whole lot of variety in the scenery either. There are some very good sections. I do quite like the hairpin, of course, and, you know, the elevation change going up and then down the hill towards the hairpin is also very solid. All in all, though, it's a little bit too repetitive to justify its length. I'm putting this one in C tier. Not necessarily because I think the layout is C tier, but more because it really just doesn't do anything that some of the tracks above don't do way better in my opinion. I would much rather see any of those than this one come back. So far, the only thing in this video worse than the French Grand Prix tracks has been my pronunciation of their names. Let's see if Reims-Gueux can change that. I suspect not. 8.2 kilometers and 5 turns. A whopping 2 of which look interesting. You couldn't have just dipped into the town a little bit? Oh, you did do that and then you changed it? Oh no, that's cool, that's fine. This track truly doesn't even have much interesting to talk about. I am aware that apparently one of the best F1 races of all time happened here in the 50s, but a modern MotoGP race here is not something I need to see. I mean, this section looks kind of interesting. You know, you got this nice fast left into a really tight braking zone until you realize that these turns are 300 meters apart. You're getting no flow here. The French countryside is undeniably beautiful. I do love these rolling hills. It's some of my favorite scenery to actually look at, but after a while it's gonna get a bit dull. F tier. It would be another few years before a new street circuit was introduced, and that would be Hedemora for the inaugural Swedish Grand Prix. This track would only be used once, as serious accidents would prevent the championship from ever returning here. I like these winding roads around the Hedemora Folkets Park. I think they would make for some challenging racing, and if you're feeling brave, some interesting overtaking opportunities, but I find that doubtful. There are a few interesting corners though. My favorite being this sharp right into this nice sweeping corner after riders come down the Soderwagen, which itself features a lot of interesting elevation change and a variety of corners. The track also features a wide variety of scenery, from forests to fields to even a little bit of lakeside and barn action. Barn action, as words I've never said before. I really quite like this track. Sure, there's only a few really solid overtaking opportunities, but I think the winding roads and elevation change would make for a fun viewing experience and some very challenging racing for the riders. This one's going in B tier. Do my criteria make any sense? No. What's next? 1959 French Grand... Oh god, the French Grand Prix. Alright, what do we have this time? Wait a minute. This looks pretty good. The Circuit de Charade hosted the French Grand Prix 10 times between 1959 and 1974. Built around a mountain overlooking a city, this 8-kilometer long track actually features a wide variety of corners and elevation changes. At the start of the lap, there is a legitimate straightaway that not only looks good, but is a reasonable length. After that, you go pretty much straight into the mountain section, and if you get over the fact that the road is a little thin here, you actually have some really solid corner variety. A nice true hairpin, some wide sweepers, and these corners which look like they flow together very nice. After that, you get this massive downhill sweeping right that sharpens up very suddenly before launching you back uphill around the other side of the mountain. The final section of this track is the most special though. After racing mostly stopped on the street circuit, part of it was converted into a permanent race circuit. And that's what this is. A medium speed corner followed by the actual literal definition of a hairpin, and then this massive sweeping left, right, left. The energy here would be off the charts. I love this combination of long mountain circuit followed by actual race circuit. That is awesome to me. And of course, there is one final overtaking opportunity to end off the lap. Last corner battles here would be amazing. This whole stadium section would just go so crazy at the end of a race. This track just slaps. It's a certified beehive paddock banger. This is my video. This is S tier. I want to see a modern race here so bad. After it was decided that Hedemora wasn't the best venue for the Swedish Grand Prix, the Swedish Grand Prix moved to the Råbelövsbanan. It covers 6.5 kilometers of Swedish countryside, and it's alright. This one really does the bare minimum. I particularly like turn 1 and this turn at the end of the back straight, although admittedly the fact that there's now a roundabout here may be altering the corner profile a bit. I like this very sharp turn at the end of this straightaway into this final kink. I think that could make for some potentially interesting battles and draft tactics on a last lap. But other than that, this one's not really doing much to differentiate itself from any others. It's just a lot of straights for my taste. I'm putting this in D tier. The Sachsenring, what is now the shortest circuit on the calendar, was once an 8-kilometer long behemoth running in and around the city of Holstein-Ernstthal. First used in 1961 and used through 1972 for the East German Grand Prix, the original Sachsenring layout looked like this, and the layout itself is quite interesting. It has some very solid elevation change, and I really do like this city section here, especially this hairpin at the end of it that starts to take you up the hill. That is beautiful chef's kiss. The elevation change itself is another benefit of this track, going up the hill and then eventually turning back around and coming downhill towards the modern circuit. With that being said, I like the Sachsenring the way it is now. This track doesn't do much that other tracks can't do, and I would rather have my Sachsenring. I like my Sachsenring. Don't take away my Sachsenring. Therefore, because I would rather just have the modern one, this one's going in D tier. The layout's not that bad, but I really don't want this one back if it comes at the expense of the current Sachsenring. That's a great track. It's 1962, and we're heading north to the Paniikki Nature Reserve in Tampere, Finland. This was the inaugural Finnish Grand Prix. This layout is not the best one we've seen, but the fact that this track is only 3.5 kilometers long is a blessing. Sure, there's only about 3 corners that look like they would offer traditional overtaking opportunities, but they each look fairly interesting. The least interesting one being this one by the lakeside over here, but even that one dips down before sending you back up the hill. Speaking of that hill, the elevation change on this course turns what would otherwise be a fairly boring track into actually having some exciting moments. Take this sweeper down here after this complex of buildings. It doesn't look that interesting, but add in the elevation change and all of a sudden, you've got an awesome uphill corner here. The biggest downside of this track is that the top section up here is so narrow and surrounded by trees. Now, of course, we're not worried about safety, but you still can't really overtake without crashing. Like, we haven't eliminated crashes, we've just eliminated injuries and deaths here. So a lack of overtakes here is still just as big of a problem as it otherwise would be. But other than that, this doesn't really look that bad. Plus, the scenery is absolutely beautiful. I would put this one in B tier. The next street circuit to be introduced was actually a direct replacement for the Finnish Grand Prix. Imatra, running alongside the Vuoski River, through the countryside and into the outskirts of the town of Imatra itself. The original layout covered just over 6 kilometers and is fine. Now, this is actually a rare track where we can watch modern motorcycles race here. The Imatra Naho is still a race on the International Road Racing Championship calendar, but that is the more modern layout, which we'll talk about in a second. As for this layout itself, we just have to look at it. I mean, it's not as offensive as a lot of the things we've seen today. You've got the iconic Turn 1, the exit of which has the train tracks, which you probably think of when you think Imatra. And then on the straight, you get this really tight S-turn chicane thing, which you need to take a perfect line to hold your speed through here. I cannot tell you how many times I have been caught out by being over-eager in Ride 4 on this particular corner. It's not really an overtaking opportunity, but it could be very punishing for riders who don't hit it perfectly while trying to maintain too much speed. After that, we get this wider sweeping S-corner, which is not on the current version of the track, and then into this sort of kink direct into a 90-degree right that sends you down a straight into a massive sweeper, and this straight and sweeper features some great elevation change, some ups and downs here. Is this actually good? Another chicane, and we're back onto the modern course. And this is actually where the start-finish line is on this layout, but it's not where it is on the modern layout. The modern layout starts where I start. I forgot to mention that. It's late. This takes riders over a bridge, around another corner with a decent profile, and into this sort of half chicane, half sweeper type deal. Finally, you're back along the river where we started. You know, I actually like this more than I initially thought. I've talked myself into it in a big way. Sure, it suffers from too many straights, but the scenery's great, it has iconic history, and the corners that are there look surprisingly good. Couple that with the elevation changes along the straights, and even those might end up being fairly interesting. I'd put this in B tier. I wouldn't mind seeing this. The other Imatra layout cuts the track in half. This does cut out some of the more interesting corners we just talked about, but it also brings the track down to a much more reasonable length given its corner count. Plus, this new sweeper into this super heavy braking zone would be very interesting. A reminder that the chicanes that are on this straight in the modern version of the track were not present in the original layout. It takes some stuff away, but it also condenses a lot of the goodness into a more reasonable package. It's going in B tier with its brother. I wouldn't mind either of these layouts. Brno. Brno is making its grand return to Grand Prix racing in 2025. But should it be coming back as the Grand Prix circuit or one of its older street circuit layouts? Let's find out. Brno has only missed 9 seasons of Grand Prix motorcycle racing since its debut in 1965, and has had a total of 3 layouts, including its modern full-time race circuit layout. The first 2 were street circuits, so let's take a look at them. The first layout used looked like this. It's 13 kilometers long, and elephant in the room, there's some pretty bad straights here. We've talked about straights enough, you know these are bad, let's move on and talk about the good stuff, because the good stuff here is really good. Some wonderful curvy mountain road coming up and then back down the hill into this city center, including these low-speed downhill switchbacks, which just look iconic. Imagine living in one of these apartment buildings and like looking out your window on your balcony and you get to watch the Grand Prix racers. Oh, that would be just peak. Finally, you shoot back through a forest going downhill, and this forest section has some deceptively sneaky corners. I also quite like the end of the lap here. A wide sweeping left takes you uphill, finally you get this nice sharp right at the apex of the hill, and then another sweeping left downhill through another village section. That's beautiful. I really like the variety of scenery and roads here. Countrysides, cities, forests, this has it all. The length does hinder it and the straights are bad, but they're not terrible, and most of the lap is interesting to some degree. I'd put this in B tier. Now, in 1975, the circuit was altered to shorten it by 3 kilometers. It is this looks like more than a 3 kilometer difference to me. I don't know why it really does, but it is not. It's only 3 kilometers difference. In the city section at the top of the mountain, riders now take a sharp right that sends them downhill much faster. Now, while the roads that made up some of the original corner profiles here are gone, I do like the idea of this sharp right into this wide sweeping left. And this downhill section, including this downhill straight at the end, would probably be really fast and would make for some iconic shots. For the most part though, this section is just downhill straights. I mean, it doesn't really get rid of a whole lot, but I would much rather see the other layout. This is one of the very few times I think that shortening one of these tracks was actually a downgrade. I'll put this one in C tier, but it's really not that much lower than its previous layout. Our final circuit of the day is Opatija, 8-time host to the Yugoslavian Grand Prix between 1969 and 1977. And I'm elated to inform you, we're ending with a banger. If this existed in the modern day, this would basically be the Monaco of MotoGP, minus some yachts and actually having some speed to it. We start on a beachfront road, sweep around the bay until we reach this uphill hairpin, and then go up the mountain with some interesting corners here. We get some classic mountain road corner variety before a nice little chicane and a transition into a downhill straight. Another chicane and then another downhill straight later, we're in a new hairpin. Another S-turn into a wide sweeping right, a tighter left, and a final right, and you're back at the plaza where the race started. I love this. It's simple, it's effective, it's only 5 kilometers long, which is amazing. It's got the elevation changes, it's got the tight hairpins, it's got the corner variety, and it's actually got some decent straightaways that aren't unreasonably long. They are a little long, but they're not unreasonably long. Plus, I'm just a sucker for the ocean. This is beautiful, look at this. Oh, this is going in S tier. I don't think it's the most well-designed track, but it might be the one that I want to see the most. And that concludes today's list. What? There's one more? Well, what is it? That's Mandalika. No, I have eyes. That's So Mandalika is technically considered a street circuit. This should be an insult to you if you have functioning eyes and ears, and even if you don't, quite frankly. Mandalika is clearly not a street circuit. It is classified that way because I guess it wants to be different. The original plan was to have some of the parts of the circuit function as streets when it's not being used, but to my knowledge, that's never happened, and this doesn't count. I like this track, it's not a street circuit. This is going in not a street circuit tier. This is my final tier list. What do you agree with? What were my most egregious takes? How bad did I pronounce everything? I am terrified to learn how many of these track names I mispronounced. I'm sure it's almost all of them. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and a special thank you to my channel members. We've got MBP2112, we've got Venturian CRO, we've got Sean, we've got Motosapien B, and Jack, who is the world's fastest Maori. If you would like to join these members, get a shout out at the end of the video, a special little B next to your name, and access to custom emotes, then press the join button down below. Thank you very much for watching, and have a fantastic day.